Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Sam Gabriel here, and welcome to What If Deku Could Manipulate Gravity, Part 13. Just wanted to greet you guys by just saying sit back and relax, you're in for a treat, so we begin.
Do something, Kurogiri.
The leader of the League of Villains was throwing a tantrum as Kurogiri was unable to move. Stain had licked the dangerous blade, and the intangible mist couldn't help his young master. The other villains were only watching the commotion, and Shigaraki pointed at Todoroki.
You said you wanted to join. Get rid of this eyesore and I'll think about it.
The bi-colored teen looked about his surroundings. He was unable to decide whose side he wanted to be on. If he went with Stain, he could get his revenge on his father, but it seemed like the League had the man outnumbered. He didn't want to make the wrong choice and stood with his back to Shigaraki, hands clenched as he prepared to fight. A giant wave of ice rushed forward like a deadly tsunami. The spikes of each frozen structure were sharp and potentially lethal. The hero killer wasted no time to jump above the incoming attack, but Todoroki raised his right hand, redirecting the dangerous charge upwards. Rotating his body, the vigilante threw a knife into the ice before springing off the blade's hilt and onto the bar's island. Another set of small weapons were flung to the teen, and Todoroki quickly let out another wave of ice to protect himself. With his right hand raised, the boy's eyes widened as he realized his mistake. The katana was already inches from his body, and he couldn't defend against it. A torturous, sharp cry echoed out around the bar as Todoroki's left hand struggled to contain the leaking wound. His sight wavered as he looked down at the ground. There was blood pooling there, and at the center of the crimson puddle lay his right arm.
Useless. Just useless.
Izuku's eyes flickered open as the commotion brought him to his senses. His throat was parched, and his body was still weak from dehydration. The sound of Nezu, Aizawa, and Vlad on TV was playing in the background, and the teen could just about tell it was the evening through instincts alone. The emerald eyes continued to analyze his surroundings when a shiver ran up his spine. The sight of Todoroki laying on the ground, passed out in a pool of his own blood, made the greenette's skin crawl like ants were digging in. The pungent smell of iron stained the air, and it burnt the back of the teen's nose. "I see you're awake," Stain addressed Izuku without turning around, and the teen nodded, unsure whether to trust the vigilante or not. He decided to go with the hero killer, however, as he saw that he was not bound to the chair he sat in. Turning to glance at Bakugo, the blonde was unconscious and was tied by his wrists. Izuku was going to act, but held himself back when he noticed how his best friend sat. With his palms open and head down, the greenette figured Bakugo must have been awake earlier and tried fighting, only to be knocked out and restrained lightly. "Here." Stain tossed a knife backwards, and Izuku caught it, realizing that it was for the flimsy rope, and released the blonde. Shaking him with all the strength he could muster, crimson eyes flickered open, and Bakugo immediately jumped to his feet. His nose crinkled as he also witnessed Todoroki's unconscious self when he noticed how drained the greenette was. He was dehydrated, and there was nothing they could do. Everyone just stood in stalemate as both sides glared at each other. The silence was suffocating until... knock, knock. Everyone turned toward the door as a voice called out, telling them pizza had arrived.
What?
Smash!
Before anyone could react, Spinner was already thrown across the room, and Kamui Woods had bound everyone within his lacquered chain prison. Dabi ignited in blue flames, but Gran Torino knocked him out before springboarding to kick the knives out of Stain's hands. Edgeshot forced Kurogiri to pass out, and it seemed like the day was saved as Shigaraki couldn't access the Nomu either. All Might pulled both boys into a hug, and Bakugo huffed, stating that he wasn't scared at all. Izuku just smiled before getting out of the way as more pros came in, but the smile was lost as the greenette realized who it was. Endeavor. The teen fell silent as the number 2 hero headed straight for his missing son. The boy had not been gone for long, yet here he was, bleeding out before the man's eyes. Emotion seemed to flicker through the usually angry face, and the flame hero slowly kneeled down. He had made this mistake once before, and it was hammering home just how much he had messed up this time. Since his youngest son left, Endeavor finally stopped to look at himself. What he saw was not something his younger self would have wanted. His only wish was to catch up with All Might, yet not only had he not accomplished that goal, he had pushed everyone he loved away. The burden he created was so large that Endeavor felt like crumbling beneath the weight. He was a pressured man with a breaking spirit, living with a broken family. Despite all, the hero slowly bent down. With one arm lifting his unconscious son up, the other lifted the missing limb that lay on the floor. His first step was to patch up the wound, and no one made a sound as he walked out, heading straight to the doctors outside. Time seemed to start up again as Dabi woke from his dazed knockout. He glared outside at the number 2 hero who held Todoroki up to be bandaged, as All Might asked for where the League's true hero was. The number 1 hero in Gran Torino had kept an eye on Shigaraki, but the man-child had started to mutter to himself. The sentence,
"Don't be ridiculous,"
quietly rang out again and again until... What's this? A silver-gray sludge suddenly appeared from thin air, and to everyone's surprise, Nomu fluttered out. No! All Might and Endeavor's simultaneous yells shook the building as they realized what just happened. Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki all suddenly vanished in the sludge along with the other villains.
Who is this guy? What just happened? He took out 3 pros. We have to run.
In an instant.
I know that, but
We have to run.
so scared.
I know that, but my
I'm
legs...
so scared. Won't move.
My legs, my body...
Won't move.
Won't move, my body... Damn it! The hell? Kachan! At the sound of their classmates' voices, the students who hid behind the wall snapped out of their fear. More villains came out of thin air, coughing the sludge up as they did. Dabi groaned as the bandaged Todoroki landed on him, and the man of blue flames slowly got up. They were all met with a well-dressed person telling Shigaraki not to despair and to try again.
Bullshit. I can tell that you're the brains of this damn idiot. Who are you?
Stain pulled a knife from inside the folds of his ragged clothes and pointed it at the man. He was backing toward Izuku, who stood beside Bakugo. The blonde seemed to know who the man was, and the brunette grit his teeth, trying to figure a way out. Uraraka shifted on her toes as she wanted to help, but Shinso raised an arm, stopping her in her tracks. Even if he had the same intentions, that moment was just not right. Escape was the only thing on his mind. The brunette wanted to protest, but calmed herself down when she noticed another among the villains. It was Stain. She immediately grabbed Ida by the arm, but the Azurat shook his head. As much as he was yearning for vengeance, he knew it wasn't a good idea. Not only was it reckless to his own life, he would also compromise the others too by putting them all in danger.
I'll have you return my students, all for one.
Have you come to kill me a second time, All Might?
As the 2 powerhouses clashed, a mighty shockwave broke out and it swept everyone off their feet. As much as it was a relief to see their hero, shivers crawled up their spines when they saw that the villain remained standing. He had been pushed back, but the fact that he could take All Might's punch barehanded made it clear this man was dangerous.
Who is he?
Izuku was beside his best friend as they both clung to the ground. The Greenette had increased gravity on them both, despite feeling drains to keep them close to where the number 1 stood.
All for one. Some bastard All Might couldn't throw in jail 6 years ago.
Izuku watched as the villain exchanged more clashes when suddenly another shockwave thundered out.
All Might!
Bakugo yelled as his hero was thrown back, and the Underworld King chuckled.
He's still as strong as before. Still haven't passed it on, I see.
Izuku caught the man's words, and thoughts ran through his mind.
He knows? How much else does he know? Is he planning to kill All Might before Kachan gets the quirk?
The teen grit his teeth as his mind spun quickly. He had spent the past few months coming to terms with himself, and in the end found peace. But the boy had accepted that he was not going to be the number 1 when his best friend received one for all, and at first he was jealous. The twisted feeling was gently unraveled by Best Genus, however, and the Greenette could smile freely once again. He was content with second, but not discouraged to continue aiming for first. Because of this, however, Izuku had only one thought in the midst of the emergency.
Kachan needs to escape.
There were no openings. All Might was struggling to fight. The number 1 was trying to protect them both, and it was holding him back. The only thing that Izuku could confirm was that the opposite was also true. All Might was holding All for One back, and the villain was trying to keep his own successors safe.
Get down!
The 2 students instinctively ducked in time for a knife to fly by. A sharp hiss could be heard, and they turned to see that the weapon was lodged into Mr. Compress's hand. Izuku immediately grabbed Bakugo, decreasing the boy's gravity before pulling with all his strength. The blonde went flying toward the hero killer, and before the Greenette could do the same, a dry hand reached his neck.
Got you.
Shigaraki held Izuku by the neck with 4 fingers and pulled the teen so he faced All Might. The hero paused as he saw this, and All for One chuckled.
It's a little early, but we can always do this now.
A burst of similar maniacal laughter broke out in raspy breaths from the Underworld Prince, and he glared at his nemesis.
Once is enough. All Might. All Might. All Might! All Might!
The crazed giggles echoed out as the greenette struggled against the grip. One wrong move and his neck would be reduced to dust.
Do you know who I am?
Raising the teen higher and forcing air out of the boy's lungs, Shigaraki made an announcement.
The one who's going to kill this child. The child you obviously value. The child you swore to protect. He will die in the hands of none other than...
He paused as he teasingly wiggled his fifth finger closer to Izuku's throat.
I am Tenko Shimura.
There was a pause from All Might as the words sunk in. Bakugo, who was desperately trying to reach Izuku, paused as the name was strangely familiar. All for one chuckled as he looked upon the despair of his rival. "What's wrong, All Might? Where's your signature smile?" The greenette watched as his idol's will to fight was crumbling before his eyes, and a wave of anguish washed over his face. Was it his fault for being caught? Was he holding All Might back? "How does it feel to know my successor is the grandson of your late master?" The King of Evil started to laugh again before shaking his head, a monstrous form pulsating and coming alive on his arm. "It's beautiful, really. Before you could even pass one for all on, your host will die in the hands of a Shimura." Hold on. Did you know that this video is sponsored by Skillshare? With the services Skillshare provides, you can access many in-depth tutorial videos on basically anything you want to learn. Each class that they have is balanced to help you with your creative endeavors. Do you want to learn how to make videos like this one? Do you want to know how to write scripts or edit audio? Skillshare has you covered. And with our link, you can have a 14-day free trial, so what are you waiting for? Click the link now and get 14 days worth of classes free. Link in description below. Now, let's get back to my actual thoughts, where I just realized that the villains think I'm the successor. Izuku grinned and relaxed, relieved to know that his best friend was mostly there for the twisted poetic injustice and not for his position. Now it was just a case of how to escape Shigaraki's grip. The world was spinning as Izuku's vision blurred. His dehydrated state was making the blood rushing up to his head just that much more unbearable. It was hot. It was hard to breathe. It hurt. "It seems that even your successor has given up." The villain who could decay anything with a single touch tried to imitate his master by laughing maniacally. Shaking Izuku's limp body, he set the boy down on his feet. His crimson eyes turned to All Might, who was starting to panic over his student's well-being, when the villain suddenly screamed in pain. Izuku rushed towards Stain, who still had Bakugo's back, albeit unwillingly, and the greenette grinned. "Thanks."
You broke my fingers!
The vigilante nodded before ducking to avoid Magna, quickly attacking so she couldn't grab her giant magnet. The teens had trusted him within the sticky situation, and although the blonde didn't fit his description of a true hero, the killer wasn't just going to murder a kid for no reason. Plus, Izuku seemed to have his complete trust in the blonde, and the greenette had proven to be a true hero at heart. To him, those who had value were worth saving. The only question was, how? The vigilante stood with the two kids as half the villains surrounded them. Some seemed conflicted to choose a side, as it seemed like the three were going to get overwhelmed, especially with how broken All Might appeared to be. And that was when a yell could be heard. "Come on!" Time seemed to pause as everyone looked up. It was an unusual sight. High up in the sky where nobody could reach were two students. Shinso was on Ida's back, with glider wings made by Momo attached to his wide-open arms. The purple-haired teen was trying his best to straighten their spinning trajectory. As Ida continued to power them up, Izuku's emerald eyes shone brightly. Like a child looking up at a shooting star, the greenette's wish had been answered. This was the ray of hope. This was a chance to escape. The quick-witted teen immediately grabbed for his best friend. Ignoring the pain crackling along his body, the greenette stood so Bakugo couldn't see his face and whispered, "Decrease." The blonde felt his partner's weight lighten up and with a grin set off a loud explosion that tore through the area. Before anyone could react, the aggressive teen gripped Ida's hand and turned his head around, expecting Izuku to grab Shinso. That was when he noticed it. His best friend was still on the ground.
Planetoid!
The distressed roar thundered down as Bakugo struggled against his classmates. He wanted to go back down, but the Azurette refused to let him go. The Greenette looked up at his lifelong rival, and a soft smile gently appeared. Despite a million emotions rushing through, only pride and sadness were left as Izuku's weight returned to normal. His body swayed. He felt sick. The backlash of overusing his quirk crashed like a wave against his battered body. The joints in his knees felt heavy, and as they thudded to the ground, the boy only continued to smile.
Sorry.
As Izuku flickered between his consciousness, Shigaraki ran forward with his left arm outstretched. The fingers on the right were purple as the Greenette had broken them, but it didn't stop the villain's intent to kill. Seconds before he could make contact, a knife flashed past, and Stain stood between them, body heaving as he licked blood off the blade. Magne froze, but it didn't matter as they were heavily outnumbered.
What are you doing?
The vigilante turns to see Mr. Compress wobbling over with an odd expression. The show lover's eyes were dull and slightly white as Izuku, through his own blurred vision, pieced together what had happened. Mr. Compress, who had been thrown to take Bakugo back, had been brainwashed. Whose side should we... Before Toga could finish asking Spinner her question, All for One chuckled before combining another monstrous collection of quirks. I would choose wisely, child. The side between a new future, or the one where this weak-willed fake is at the top. The choice is yours. The king of the underworld caught and threw back Stain's sudden blade that tried to embed him into his vitals. The hero killer was almost buzzing with anger, but he continued to stand defensively before Izuku. With full intentions to save the Greenette, he grabbed Compress by the collar and threw him at the child. Before anyone could react, the Greenette was reduced to a marble and the entertainer snapped into reality. Stain caught the falling orb before staring at the man he had admired his whole life. All Might knew that trusting someone on the unlawful side of society was a bad idea, but under the circumstances, he couldn't help but trust the killer. His signature smile returns to his face, and there was a moment of awe in the vigilante, before he snapped out of it and ran for a broken stone wall.
Solo was how I've always been, but...
The man who had walked the path of solitude thus far suddenly pointed a dagger at a certain three who worriedly glanced at him like lost chicks. They froze but smiled again when the blade spun to face himself. It was all the words needed, and Toga blushed and immediately ran to him, squealing as she did. Spinner followed suit, albeit in a more calmed manner, but Dabi took a moment to calm down. Todoroki was still unconscious and wrapped up in bandages at his feet.
How ironic. The very side Father took so long to obtain has been cut off.
Things were not going well for Shigaraki. The man-child could only stand and watch in frustration as three of his Vanguard Action Squad quit and left. Not only had Bakugo escaped, but Izuku was also being taken away by the vigilante. From his own twisted mindset, the young leader had wanted the boys for one reason: to kill one and let the other feel betrayed before the number one. He wanted to see All Might suffer. He wanted his sweet revenge. All the man could think about was destroying society as it was. Dabi lifted the bicolored teen up in his arms, and a mix of emotions seemed to run through his expression. At first, his goal was to kill the teen before a certain individual to prove he was stronger, but Endeavor's masterpiece had willingly left the hero society.
If Shota becomes a vigilante with me, I can force that old man to acknowledge his mistake from all those years ago. He should have chosen me from the start.
The scarred eyes peered up at the hero killer, who didn't seem to mind the sudden extra person. Instead, he crouched down and seemed ready to leave. The other two villains cheered as they became vigilantes, tailing their idol's footsteps, and Dabi followed, a grin on his face.
I'll make him regret it.
He knew Todoroki was going to have a fuss when he awoke, but it would be nothing he couldn't handle.
Can you see it already, Endeavor? Can you? I can't wait for the day that...
A new plan of revenge formulated in the scarred man's head as he also jumped into the wall, announcing to the world that he and Todoroki had become vigilantes.
The day that your oldest and youngest sons kill you in cold blood.
Smash!
Sweat dripped down his heated face, and All Might's chest heaved heavily from exhaustion. The fight had been longer than anticipated. The eternal flame that burned brightly within him was taking its toll on his body. He didn't care, though, as his student's safety was top priority. Bakugo had escaped, and Izuku was saved. Even if the one who saved the Greenette was Stain, the number one couldn't ignore the fact that the hero killer had defended the boy with his life. Even if Todoroki was taken, he doubted the child would be harmed. All for One managed to force-activate a single portal during the hero's momentary falter, and the colossal blonde immediately ran forward. His fists were stopped as his nemesis held him back, and All Might had no choice but to watch the man-child disappear.
Tenko Shimura, reborn as Tomura Shigaraki. He will be the one to take you down. All Might.
You won't escape me this time, all for one!
With the number one hero's voice ringing in their ears, Uraraka skidded to a halt as she and her classmate made it to a safe zone. Momo doubled over as she caught her breath back and lifted her tightly clenched fist. Looking at the turquoise marble, the events that occurred only a minute ago rapidly flashed through her mind. How did he know we were there? Uraraka shook her disheveled bob, but she had no clue in the matter either. Somehow Stain had known of their presence, and the killer's intuition sent shivers up their spines. They were glad to have Izuku back, but seeing the man disappear, the girls knew that the vigilante side of society was going to become the third party of power. Do you think he'll turn back soon? Momo stood straight up before thinking about their situation logically. I think that villain's quirk will either be released from a time limit or when he just releases Midoriya. They no longer have him as captive, so there's no reason for them to keep him as he is. As if on cue, Izuku suddenly appeared. Ow! Getting up from the floor, the teen stretched his body with a sigh. His voice was still hoarse from dehydration, and everything was just painful. I feel like crap. Shinso spotted them and waved from among the crowd. Ida and Bakugo were both there, and the Azurette seemed relieved to see them. He marched over and handed the greenette a water bottle, asking if he was okay. As a response, Izuku smiled. It could have been a turd bit better. Overall, a pretty shitty experience. Poop jokes, really? Yep. Uraraka sighed in exasperation, and the greenette's teasing grin shifted into a more sincere one. But thanks for saving us. It helped a lot. Smiles broke out all around for everyone as they weaved through the crowd, and Izuku turned toward Bakugo, concerned that the blonde had been quiet the whole time. Katchan? The words fell short as his best friend simply nodded and increased his speed, walking away faster. He left a bitter feeling at the back of Izuku's throat, and he couldn't quite say anything. A small chill ran up his spine as they turned to the screen, eyes curious on what to expect when they were greeted with not All Might, but Toshinori. Fear ran through the citizens, yet somehow Izuku didn't feel a thing. He was calm. His thoughts were like a chaotic maelstrom on a still water surface. Everything was jumbled, yet nothing seemed to exist. The greenette felt empty. All Might had won the fight. That was all there was to it. As Izuku looked up at the screen, Toshinori pointed to the camera. The words, "You're next," ran out. And although everyone jumped for joy, a bittersweet emotion sat in the greenette's stomach. All Might was at his limit. This meant one thing. Katchan will be getting one for all. Bakugo was still looking up at the screen. The crimson eyes seemed to shine a little, and Izuku grit his teeth. Fists clenched and head down, the boy bit his lip to try and stop his own escaping tears. Damn it. Like a boulder getting stuck between trees, the barrage of thoughts came to a sudden halt when Momo appeared before the greenette. She and the rescue squad were leaving, and they didn't want to be separated again. A forced smile appeared on the boy's lips, and he nodded, signaling her to return to the conversation with Shinso as Uraraka and Ida spoke ahead. The greenette tailed slowly behind when a calloused hand grabbed him. Turning around, Izuku was faced with Bakugo, only inches away from his face. Katchan? Why? Since they were so close, nobody could see the tears that threatened to spill from the blonde's eyes. Wet crimson orbs were silently screaming in pain, and Izuku could do nothing to help. He was just as devastated over All Might's power limit, but the blonde shook his head, grabbing the greenette's arms and shaking him slightly. Who fucking cares about that? The rest of the world seemed insignificant as Bakugo tried to clear his thoughts. What hurt him was not the responsibility of All Might. It was something else. At this rate, I'm gonna... Izuku took a step back, turning so he could walk toward the others. As much as he didn't want to think about it, the greenette figured he could no longer understand Bakugo. Not knowing who All for One was earlier was only proof. If the tears were called by One for All, Izuku knew he couldn't help. The teen didn't mind, though, and told himself that he could catch up in his own way. His back was to the blonde, and he spoke with genuine happiness and pride in his voice. It'll be okay, Katchan. You're All Might's successor, after all. I'm sure you'll surpass me easily, and... He wearily grinned. Be the number one hero. As his best friend's back got further away, Bakugo clenched his fists before shaking his head. You missed the fucking point, Planetoid.
Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed.
Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.